Hello, or should I say, Здравствуйте. My name is Vladimir Morrison, and I am here to teach you the ABCs of Russian diction. In this video, you will learn all the sounds you need to know in order to sing in Russian or Church Slavonic like a native speaker. Singing in Russian is easy, and singing in Russian is fun. And I know this because I'm a bilingual American of Russian descent. Since 1987, I have been president of Musica, Russica, a leading publisher of Russian choral music, and a consulting firm offering support services for performances of Russian choral and vocal music. If you're watching this video, you're most likely either a choral conductor or a singer who plans to perform some Russian choral repertoire, or perhaps a solo singer considering some Russian opera or art song repertoire. Or perhaps you simply want to work on polishing your Russian pronunciation to sound more like a native speaker. If you make the effort and master the sounds of the Russian language presented in this video, this will enable you to sing or speak Russian or Church Slavonic with greater confidence, greater accuracy, and greater authenticity. Now, the study of how a language is pronounced from the standpoint of a linguist can potentially be very complicated. In our video, we will not go into all the linguistic complexities in great detail, but will instead focus more on the practical side of things as they apply to singing. We will, of course, discuss the important sounds of the Russian language, and we will also show you visually how the formation of Russian sounds differs from similar sounds in English, and particularly American English, so that when you sing in Russian, you will sound по-русски and not по-американски. One of the biggest obstacles musicians face when dealing with Russian is the fact that it is written in the Cyrillic alphabet. Although both the Cyrillic and Latin or Roman alphabets are descendants of the Greek alphabet, there are just enough unfamiliar letter shapes in Cyrillic to make things confusing. For example, some familiar-looking letters in Cyrillic have a different meaning in the Roman alphabet. The letter C has the sound of S. The letter P has the sound of R, and so forth. Some letters, such as Ya and E, look like they've been reversed. And still other letter shapes have a totally strange look. For example, B, G, and U. So while it's possible to take the trouble to learn the Cyrillic alphabet, for people who are encountering Russian on an occasional basis, this requires more effort than most people are willing to make. This is why nearly 30 years ago, Musica Russica developed the Russica transliteration system, a simple but effective way of phoneticizing Russian and other Slavic languages, such as Ukrainian and Church Slavonic, using the Roman alphabet. Once transliterated, these languages read entirely phonetically. That is to say, there are no silent letters, as in English, or hidden letters or sounds, as in French, for example, where you see one thing on the page and must pronounce something different. In this video, we will take you through all the sounds of the Russian language, referencing 3 different ways of notating them in written form: in Cyrillic, in the Russica transliteration, and in the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. We have separated all the sounds or groups of sounds into separate chapters, so that you will easily be able to find the particular sound that you may like to go back and review. We will first talk about Russian vowel sounds, and then proceed to the Russian consonant sounds. Before we take a look at some actual examples, I'd like to point out some of the beneficial aspects of singing in Russian from a purely vocal standpoint. Russian is an eminently singable language, developed over 1,000 years within a highly vocal culture. It has pure vowels, much like Latin or Italian, and each vowel is very distinct, having its own well-defined character and mouth shape. So we have a, ya, o, yo, u, you, ye, I, and the unstressed o. Russian consonants are more intense than they are in English. One has to really commit the muscles of the lips, the tongue, and the face in general in order to render them properly. Thus, as you work to master the diction of a Russian piece, your diction is likely to improve overall for all languages that you sing. You will lose some of the lazy habits of diction that we tend to suffer from in America. And very conveniently, these intense, committed Russian consonants help to maintain a liquid legato sound, serving as a lubricant for the vowels, just as in Italian. This helps to deliver the words, both their sound and their meaning, to the ear of the listener with great effectiveness and expression. We will begin by considering the vowel sounds, starting with the vowel a. The vowel a is the same as in the English word father, and which is found in such Russian words as mama, radost, slava, angel, tsar. In Russian, the vowel a has also an iotized counterpart, ya, which means that the sound a is preceded by a brief, fleeting y sound, y. It is also known as a J glide, heard in such words as ya, yarka, tvaya, bayatsa. Regardless of whether the iotization is present or not, the vowel sound that is sustained while singing the a is a. For example, slava or tvaya. As you can see from our examples, in the Russica transliteration system, this vowel sound is represented by the letter a, or for the iotized version, by the combination ia or ya at the beginning of the word. In the IPA, ja is used. Non-Russian singers generally don't have trouble with the Russian vowel a. It is pure and straightforward. Next we have the vowel o, as in the English word obey, or the Italian word occhi. It's found in such Russian words as on, vot, gost, and the Church Slavonic word Господи. The iotized counterpart of o is yo. It's found only in modern Russian words such as yeyo, yolka, mayo, lyotsa, подъем. Again, regardless of the iotization, the vowel sound sustained in singing is o. And in the Russica transliteration, the sound is represented by the letter o, or the combination io or yo. In IPA, the symbols that you see on your screen are used. The main thing to remember in order to produce an authentic sounding Russian o is to avoid even the slightest hint of a diphthong. Let's compare the Russian on versus the English own. The Russian o has no diphthong versus in English where you have the OW, O. Or the Russian word vot versus the English word vote. Again, no diphthong in the Russian, O in the English. Or the Russian yeyo versus yo-yo. You can hear the diphthongs there. Learning to keep your O sounds pure is an important step to sounding like a Russian. What we just said about the O vowel is very similar to what we are going to say about the Russian vowel U, as heard in the English word food, and found in such Russian words as tut, kuda, muj, dusha, уже. U also has an iotized counterpart, yu, in words such as юность, юг, боюсь, июнь. This sound is represented in the Russica transliteration by either the letter U or the combination IU or YU. As with the vowel O, it's very important to keep the U sound pure without any hint of a diphthong following, or by changing it to the U or the U sound in English. So let's compare the Russian word tut versus the English toot. You hear how there's a U in the English toot, whereas in Russian there is no diphthong, tut. Or we have muj versus mooch. I think you can hear the diphthong in mooch. Keeping a pure U sound is especially important in the frequently occurring Church Slavonic word Alleluia. Under no circumstances should it sound as it might be pronounced in the Deep South, Alleluia, with a diphthong after the U. Once again, in Slavonic, it's Alleluia versus Alleluia. The situation is a bit more complex with regards to the Russian vowels e and its iotized counterpart ye. The sound e, as in the English word bet, is found in such Russian words as eto, echo, ech, poet, where it is spelled with the letter e, but also in words spelled with the letter ye. For example, жена, желание, шелест, свет. By contrast, its iotized counterpart ye occurs very commonly in such words as ей, ехать, еда, приехали. There's a slight difference between what we call an open Russian e, denoted in IPA by the symbol you see on your screen, and the more closed sound ye, denoted in IPA by the symbol on the screen. But even Russian diction experts disagree as to how great the difference is when these sounds are sustained in singing. So in the Russica transliteration system, both sounds are transcribed by the symbol E and by the combination YE at the beginning of words. If the ye is followed by a hard consonant, for example, as in the word svet, it remains more open, svet. If it's followed by a palatalized or soft consonant, for example, in the Slavonic word svete, a case could be made for singing the ye vowel a bit more closed, svete. But many will find this difference to be very subtle. What is more important is that, like all other Russian vowels, the ye must not have any type of diphthong after it. For example, sung correctly, the Russian word is тебе versus тебе, which is not correct. Sung correctly, the word is не versus не, which is not correct. In the Russica transliteration system, the stress in multisyllable words is indicated by an accent mark on the vowel. The accent indicates only stress and does not alter the sound of the vowel at all. So one should be especially careful when, in the Russica transliteration, the E is shown with an accent mark. Unlike the French acute accent, or accent aigu, the accent mark does not change the character of the vowel in any way, but simply indicates stress. The last pair of Russian vowels we will consider are I and Ö, depicted in the Russica transliteration as I and I with an umlaut, respectively. The first sound, as in the English word meat, is found in such Russian words as I, mir, tihi, vino, лицо. The second sound, which has no exact English counterpart, is found in the common Russian pronouns ты, вы, мы, and words such as сын, рыба, and the Church Slavonic words ныне and vyshny. Following certain consonants, the letter I is pronounced like I, for example, in words such as жизнь, живот, широкий, слышишь. The sound I is rather easy for non-Russians to render, since it has exact counterparts in English, German, and Italian, and a number of other languages. The sound I, however, because it does not have an exact parallel in languages commonly known to singers, tends to be seen somewhat as a difficult vowel. But in fact, as we will show you, it should not be regarded as such a problem. The first thing to remember is that this sound is not a diphthong, or e. Like all Russian vowels, it is pure, having only one position in the mouth, only one identity. To achieve the proper sound, shape your mouth to say ah, and then say the vowel e through it, like this. Ah, e. Notice how the shape of my mouth on the outside does not change as I move from ah to e. The change occurs inside my mouth as my tongue moves up towards the roof of my mouth towards more of an e position. Ah, e. Another way of thinking about the e sound is to say I as in such English words as hit or dip, but to put a little more mouth space behind it in the back of the throat, like this. Hit, I. Dip, I. Compare the English word tin versus the Russian ty, or the English mint versus Russian my. In singing, these two sounds, I and I, actually approximate each other rather closely. And as soon as singers realize that, the Russian vowel I ceases to be such an obstacle. Before we complete our survey of Russian vowels, there's just one more sound we need to mention, and this is the unstressed O sound, which occurs only in modern Russian words, not in Church Slavonic, and which in singing approximates the schwa sound indicated in IPA variably, and thus confusingly, either as an upside-down E or an upside-down A. In the Russica transliteration, this sound is rendered as the O with the little short sign above it, because it is in fact related to the letter O, but tending towards the A or the Notice how we transliterate the modern Russian words хорошо, восток, по улице, государь. But the unstressed O does not occur in Church Slavonic, and so we transliterate these Slavonic words as follows: Господи, помилуй, подай, благослови, восток. The important thing about the unstressed O is that in modern Russian, you never want to sing an unstressed O, that is the sound, as O. For example, хорошо versus хорошо, or по улице instead of по улице. The important thing about the unstressed O is that in modern Russian, you never want to sing an unstressed O as O. It sounds very peculiarly regional and is definitely not the accepted way of classical singing pronunciation. On the other hand, using the unstressed O in Church Slavonic is simply wrong. For example, Господи, помилуй is incorrect because it reduces the unstressed O to A. The correct way is Господи, помилуй. Or compare благослови, which is not correct, versus благослови. Or подай, Господи, versus подай, Господи. Such mistakes can occasionally be heard from amateur church choirs in Russia, who are mispronouncing this venerable language used for centuries in the Russian Orthodox Church. Summarizing what we have to say about Russian vowels, altogether there are 6 basic sounds: A, O, U, E, I, and I, plus the unstressed O, which gets reduced to something very close to A or 4 of these sounds have iotized counterparts, which means that they are preceded by a fleeting Y sound. But neither the basic vowels nor their iotized partners, once formed, become part of any diphthongs or triphthongs. So, if I want to speak English with a Russian accent, I must eliminate all diphthongs from my speech. And so must you if you want your singing to sound authentically Russian. Remember earlier we mentioned that Russian consonants are generally more intense than English consonants, certainly more intense than those of American English, which tend to be laid back and lazy. And indeed, Russians can be very intense also. But what this means in terms of consonants is that the amount of energy required from your lips, your tongue, and the muscles of your face is greater to form Russian consonants than what you may be used to. Like all consonant sounds, Russian consonants are categorized by linguists according to their sound character. So we have sibilants, such as S and Z, sh and zh, fricatives, such as f and v, plosives, p and b, dentals, t and d, nasals, and n, liquids, l and r, and velars, g and k, as well as some mixed categories. We will take up each of these groups in turn and focus on the physical mechanism, the actual muscles involved in their formation. Besides the categories we mentioned above, within each category, consonants can be divided into voiced and unvoiced. Voiced consonants are those like b, d, g, m, n, v, z, r, and o, which can be pitched or sustained on a particular level of musical pitch. By contrast, unvoiced consonants are those like p, t, k, f, and s, which cannot have a pitch associated with them, but simply consist of a particular type of expulsion of air. Pairs of voiced and unvoiced consonants exist in every language, and Russian is no exception. What makes Russian consonants even more varied is that within each category and subcategory, most Russian consonants come in pairs of hard and soft, just like Russian vowels have their plain and iotized varieties. As we shall see in a few moments, there is a relationship here. Linguists sometimes refer to soft consonants as palatalized, but since the palate is not involved in forming all of them, we simply prefer to call them soft. Speakers of Russian must learn which vowel-consonant combinations are hard and which are soft, and must learn to apply these adjustments on the fly, so to speak. But so that you don't have to worry which consonant, hard or soft, you have to pronounce in a given word, we have taken care of all of this in the phoneticized texts found in our Musica, Russica editions. In order to differentiate the hard consonants from the soft, we have used the tilde symbol placed over the soft consonants in order to indicate that they must be softened. This placement is very important, and it is unique to the Russica transliteration system. It shows that the softening of a consonant occurs on the actual consonant. It is the actual consonant that's modified, rather than something that happens before or after the consonant. In IPA, the softening of the consonant is indicated by a superscript J, the so-called J glide. Older IPA practice, however, used a hook sign underneath the consonant, which we believe is more effective because it shows that it is the actual consonant that's affected by the softening or palatalization. Therefore, in this video, we have adopted the older symbol. We will now consider each sound category of consonant pairs, the sibilants, the fricatives, etc., and show you how to form both their hard and their soft variants with your mouth. And at the same time, where appropriate, we will demonstrate how to differentiate these Russian sounds from English sounds so that your consonants sound authentically Russian. Let's begin with the plosives. The plosive consonant sounds b and p are formed by building up pressure behind your lips and then letting the sound explode or pop from behind the lips. This is exactly the same mechanism that's used in English and other languages, but in Russian, the pressure or force behind the consonant is more intense. Let me illustrate by contrasting the Russian boy versus the English boy, or the Russian be versus English bay. Compared to Russian, the English b is relatively gentle, genteel, we might say. The difference between a hard b and a soft b has to do with how hard your lips are. quite firm for the hard b, while for the soft b, the lips are pursed and relaxed a bit. The easiest way to compare and contrast the Russian hard and soft b's is to combine them with different vowels. Ba versus bya, be, bye, bo, byo, bu, byu, b, b. As you can see, the soft b with a tilde occurs after iotized vowels, but it is the actual consonant that must be softened in order to achieve the desired effect. Under no circumstances do we want to say bya instead of bya, or bye instead of bye, or byu instead of byu. In each case, we need to soften the consonant itself. With the unvoiced plosive p, the same principles apply. The Russian p is more intense than the English. For example, let's compare poi in Russian versus poi in English, or pay in Russian versus pay in English. The Russian consonant requires a split second longer to form, holding the lips together and allowing more pressure to build up behind them. Again, pay versus pay, puh versus pour, payu versus pai. The difference between a hard Russian P and a soft one has to do with visibly pursing the lips. Watch as we go through the hard and soft consonant vowel pairs. Pa, pya, pe, pye, po, pyo, pu, pyu, p, p. The dental consonants, d and t, are so called because they involve the action of the tongue, actually the tip of the tongue, against the front teeth. This action is similar to forming these sounds in English and other languages, but in Russian, a little more time and energy is required to form these sounds, making them more intense. Let me illustrate once again using the d consonant. In Russian, we say die versus the English die. We say disc versus the English disc. We say in Russian duet versus English duet. We say ded versus dead. Notice that while in English it's only the tip of the tongue that touches the top front teeth, and rather briefly at that, in Russian more of the tongue is pressed against the teeth before the release and for a slightly longer time. Now, the difference between a Russian hard D and a soft D has to do with how hard and pointed your tongue is. Quite firm for the hard D, coming all the way to the bottom of the front teeth, while for the soft D, the tongue is flatter against the gums of the top teeth. Once again, we will compare and contrast the Russian hard and soft Ds by combining them with our familiar vowel pairs. Da, ja, de, je, do, jo, du, ju, di, ji. Once again, It's the actual consonant that is softened, so that we do not get dya instead of dja, or dye instead of dje, or dyu instead of ju. The unvoiced plosive T is quite similar to the D, except there is no musical pitch that's produced. To form the Russian T, more time and intensity is required, and more of the tongue comes into contact with the upper teeth. To illustrate, the Russian toy versus the English toy. The Russian T versus T. The Russian tut versus the English tool. The Russian taino versus the English tiny. The Russian telo versus tell. Notice how active the tongue must be in order to produce the Russian consonant, while in English the tongue just barely flicks against the teeth or upper gums. The difference between a hard Russian T and a soft one, like the D, has to do with how hard and pointed your tongue is. Quite firm for the hard T, coming all the way to the bottom of the front teeth, while for the soft T, the tongue is flatter against the gums of the top teeth, producing a slight whistling sound. Watch carefully as we compare and contrast the Russian hard and soft T's by combining them with the vowel pairs. Ta, cha, te, che, to, cho, tu, chu, ti, chi. The fricative consonant sounds, v and f, are formed by the action of the upper teeth against the lower lip. This action is quite similar between Russian and English, so there's very little to offer in terms of contrast. In the case of the voice consonant v, there is, however, a difference between the hard v and a soft v, differentiated by the spot on the lower lip where the teeth make contact. For the soft v, the lower lip juts out a bit further, and the teeth make contact more on the inside of the lip than on the outside of the lip. Practice with me as I illustrate va versus vya, ve, ve, vo, vyo, vu, vyu, vi, vi. It's very important that you feel the difference on your lip, so that when you see a soft V with a tilde over it, you know that you must soften the lip and let it protrude a bit, just as you would do in saying the English word view, as opposed to voodoo. The unvoiced fricative F does not present any challenges, since in Russian it's practically identical to the English. It is also relatively rare, so it's difficult even to find hard and soft pairs of consonants to illustrate the difference. Therefore, we will not dwell on it any longer and move on to the sibilants. The sibilants z and s are quite similarly produced in Russian as in other languages. So again, there is nothing to offer by way of contrast in the mechanism by which they are produced. As all singers know, sibilants are both essential to good diction and potentially very dangerous if they are misplaced, either too early or too late. Thus, one must be careful with Russian sibilants and not overemphasize them, so they do not produce an excessive whistling effect. There is a rather subtle difference between a hard z and s and a soft z and s. and we will illustrate it now in combination with the vowel pairs. The difference has mainly to do with the formation and position of the tongue in relation to the hard palate. But because it happens inside the mouth, it's difficult to illustrate this in the video. Listen carefully, and as you practice these consonant-vowel pairs, focus on raising and flattening the tongue in order to produce the softened sibilant. We have za, zya, ze, ze, zo, zyo, zu, zu, zi, zi. Now the same thing with the unvoiced sibilant S. Sa, sya, se, se, so, syo, su, su, si, si. By now, you can see how important it is to make the adjustment in the actual consonant so that we get se with a softened S and not sie, a hard S followed by ye. We get sya and not sya. We get su and not siu. The Russian nasals, m and n, exist only in a voiced variety. Both involve sound resonating in the nasal cavity after it's been blocked to an extent by the lips in the case of the m and by the tongue in the case of the n. In terms of their mechanism, Russian nasals are quite similar to those of English, except they are a little more prolonged, and in the case of the n, more of the tongue engages the teeth than in English. The Russian nasals come in hard and soft varieties, and it is here that important differences occur in their formation. In the case of the hard M, the lips remain firm, with the outer lips closed together, while in the case of the soft M, they are softened and pursed, with more of the inside lip involved. Watch and repeat the following consonant-vowel pairs. Ma, mya, me, mye, mo, myo, mu, myu, mi, mi. In the case of the N, the difference between the hard and soft is produced by the shape and position of the tongue relative to the hard palate. The tongue is hard and more pointed for the hard N, engaging the tip against the teeth, while for the soft N, it is softer and flatter against the hard palate. Once again, I will illustrate. Na, nya, ne, nye, no, nyo, nu, nyu, ni, ni. With the nasals, the difference between the hard and soft consonants is quite exposed. Once again, we want to make sure that the consonant is formed appropriately because we want to avoid mya, a hard M followed by a ya, instead of mya. We want to avoid nya instead of nya, nye instead of nye. We come now to one of the more challenging Russian consonants, R. The sound R comes in hard and soft varieties, and both are extremely important in making your Russian sound authentic. The hard R sound is always rolled or fluttered. It's what makes a Russian sound Russian. Some non-Russians have no problem rolling their R's. You can start out with a flipped British R and then prolong the sensation, brr, letting the tongue vibrate several times against the gums behind the upper teeth instead of just once. British, British. But if you happen to have difficulty rolling your R, another way to approach it is by first practicing the tongue flutter. Instead of tensing and pointing your tongue, let it relax and lie flat in the mouth. Then, from the depth of your throat, direct a good stream of air against the underside of your limpid tongue and let it be caught up in a flutter like a magic carpet in a jet stream. Start your stream of air with an like this. Your fluttered R may be unvoiced at first, but now you can voice it. Now just isolate the without the before it, and there's your Russian R. The soft Russian R is produced in a similar fashion, but the tongue is much softer and its tip flicks against the gums or the upper teeth right at the gum line, where the hard R is further back, tending towards the hard palate. The soft Russian R, is produced in similar fashion, but the tongue is much softer, and its tip flicks against the gums of the upper teeth right at the gum line, whereas the hard R is further back, tending towards the hard palate. The soft R is typically shorter, closely approximating the British flipped R. British, r. Listen carefully and practice the difference between the hard R and the soft R. Ra, rya. Re, re. Ro, ryo. Ru, ryu. Ri, ri. Of course, it goes without saying that the American R, has absolutely no place in Russian. The Russian L, surprisingly, is one of the consonants that singers seem to struggle with the most. In my many years of coaching non-Russian singers, I can truly say that this is the one consonant that challenges singers of all ages and skill levels, from children to professional opera singers. And like the rolled R, the correct rendering of the Russian L, both its hard and its soft varieties, is a telltale giveaway. If it is not done correctly, the Russian will not sound authentic. Perhaps surprisingly, the hard Russian L is remarkably similar to the ordinary American L. It's produced with a thick, relaxed tongue against the hard palate, with the tip of the tongue against the front teeth. In fact, the tip can rest comfortably against the lower teeth, while the rear of the tongue feels like it's deep in the throat. Compare the following English words with similar words in Russian. The English slow versus the Russian slovo. The English blog versus the Russian blag. Glossy, glossy. Glimmer, glibba. Mulch, molcha. Notice how remarkably similar the English and Russian L sounds are. It's perhaps because this thick L sound seems to block off the throat that singers resist that temptation and try to sing a more pointed, flipped L, produced by the tip of the pointed tongue against the top front teeth. For example, glory, flippant, slipper. This type of L is totally wrong for singing in Russian and should be avoided completely. To help singers feel the proper sensation needed for the Russian L, we've come up with a little exercise that goes like this. First, you growl deep in the throat, grrr. Then you add the sound L, girl. And then add some vowels, gorilla. Practice this. Grr, said the girl gorilla in its glory. When it comes to the soft Russian L, things are a little easier. To form the soft L, the tongue flattens and its sides go up towards the hard palate. The tip of the tongue can rest against the center of the front teeth, but it can just as easily remain touching the lower front teeth. Contrast the following words: the English less versus the Russian les. The English lone versus lyon. The English L, of course, is hard. The Russian L is soft. Lube in English versus lublю in Russian, or log versus lягу. Leak in English versus leak. So now let's compare the following Russian hard and soft L combinations. Listen and repeat carefully, paying close attention to where your tongue is in your mouth and how it adjusts when you go from a hard L to a soft L. La, ля. Le, le. Lo, лё. Лу, лю. Ли, ли. Now you're ready to practice Russian words that have two L's in close proximity. One word that occurs very often in Russian sacred music is Alleluia. The first L is soft. The second L is hard. Once again, Alleluia. Another example is the Russian word lilovy, violet. Lilovy. And then the following Slavonic words. Slavoslovie. Both L's are hard. Slavoslovie. Or Blagoslovляю. The first L is hard. Blago, slo. The second L is hard. And the third L is soft. Vляю. Blagoslovляю. Or the word sproslavляемый. First L is hard. Sproslavляемый. The second L is soft. When you are able to clearly differentiate the two types of Russian L and produce them accurately as the text requires, you will have mastered this oddly challenging consonant and will never say slava instead of slava, or blagoslovi instead of blagoslovi, or molchit instead of molchit, and so forth. We're almost at the end of our survey of Russian consonants. When we were practicing our rolled or fluttered r sound, we already encountered the unvoiced aspirated sound found in such words as хорошо, хлеб, хвалите, and херувимы. This sound is formed deep in the back of the throat, as if you're trying to fog up a mirror in front of you. In some other systems of transliteration, for example, those used in Russian novels, the sound may be phoneticized using a KH. Under no circumstances should this sound be preceded by a hard K, хорошо, or хвалите. In the Russica transliteration, we use the H with an underscore to indicate that there is no hint, even the slightest hint of a K. The aspirated unvoiced sound has a voiced counterpart, h. This sound is not found in classical modern Russian, only in regional dialects. It is found in Ukrainian and rather prominently in Church Slavonic, in such words as Господи, глагол, глас. As you can see, in the Russica transliteration, we use the combination GH to denote this sound, while the International Phonetical Alphabet uses the lowercase Greek letter gamma. The difference between this sound, GH, g, and the hard G, g, is particularly noticeable at the beginnings of words, which is where the Russica transliteration makes that distinction, although technically all G's in Church Slavonic should be rendered as g. For example, благослови, благообразный, глагол, Богородице. The mechanism for differentiating these two consonants has to do with the action of the soft palate in the back of the throat. In the case of the hard G, the consonant is formed with a click of the soft palate, g. In the case of the soft guttural g, the action of the soft palate against the surrounding tissues is much more gradual and gentle. You can feel the difference by contrasting go, go, go with ho, ho, ho. Or in the Russian, without diphthong, at the end of the O, go, 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 versus ro, ro, ro. The latter being an oft-encountered sound in Ukrainian. But the Church Slavonic g, as pronounced in Russia, is a bit more gentle than that. Some singers say that it helps them to think of blending a bit of a w sound, which helps to smooth out the guttural g at the back of the throat. O, Господи, Господи. Once you experience the right feeling, this consonant becomes rather easy to execute. In the preceding sections, we have explained all the unusual consonant sounds in Russian, which require special mention. The few we haven't yet discussed share common traits with familiar sounds in English and other European languages and do not exhibit marked differences between hard or soft varieties. We will simply mention them here for the sake of completeness. We've already mentioned the voiced velar consonant g, and it also has an unvoiced counterpart, k. We have the voiced post-alveolar consonant, zh, as in the English word treasure and pleasure, or in the Russian words zhena, zhalka, zholty. Its unvoiced counterpart, sh, as in the English ship or short, or the Russian words shum, shorokh, shag. We have the unvoiced consonant combinations, ts, as in the English gets, or the German Zeit, or the Russian words tsar, tsena, otets. And we have the Russian ch sound, as in the English chop, chosen, in the Russian words chasta, человек, черный. And then we have the combination SHCH, as in the English fresh cheese, or the Russian счастье, щека, отпущающий. Linguists make some further subtle distinctions among these types of sounds in various languages. But if we remember that as singers we must sing these sibilant sounds carefully and relatively gently, the general equivalencies given above are sufficiently accurate. Like English, Russian has a sound called an approximant. It is the y, or i kratkaya, which is equivalent to the English consonant y in the word yes, or yellow. It's produced by audibly expelling some air between the raised tongue and the gums above the top front teeth. Y, y, y. And it usually serves as a glide between two adjacent vowels. For example, её, веет, пою, твоя. Or it can occur at the end of a word, following another consonant. For example, пей, мой, большой, высокий, красный. The function of this approximant is very similar to the English y in its consonantal form, and this is how it's depicted in the Russica transliteration system. It's important to keep this sound very brief and not let it take on the character of a separate vowel, which would result in a diphthong. Remember, Russian has no diphthongs. And one final detail related to the approximant sound y. We've seen how Russian consonants, the ones marked with a tilde in the Russica transliteration, are typically followed by iotized vowels. One might say that they are softened by those iotized vowels. Well, once upon a time in Old Church Slavonic, there was another vowel which was capable of softening a preceding consonant, but which has now fallen silent, both in modern Russian and in Church Slavonic as it is pronounced today. This is the so-called мягкий знак, or soft sign. It can appear either in the middle of words or at the end of words, and it has the effect of softening the consonant before it. Remember that for each consonant we describe the mechanism for softening, usually by changing the position of the tongue or the lips. But if there is no vowel after the soft sign, for example, at the end of a word, this means that a very small, brief approximant y sound is present, not enough to form its own syllable, but enough to make a difference. So, for example, we will compare these words, klub, which ends in a hard b, versus golub, which ends in a soft b. Nrav versus krov. The first is hard v, the second one is soft v. Golod, hard d, versus glad, soft d. Залез, hard z, versus lez, soft z. Football, hard L, versus bol, soft L. Храм, hard M, versus впрямь, soft M. Сон, hard N, versus песнь, soft N. Bor, hard R, versus рыцарь, soft R. Ovos, hard S, versus os, soft S. Brat, hard T, versus zabrat, soft T. We hope you have enjoyed this excursion through the sounds of the Russian and Church Slavonic languages. We've divided this video into chapters so that you can easily go back and review particular areas that you may have found challenging. Remember, the three principles of good Russian diction are: all vowels are pure, without diphthongs. Extra energy is required to produce Russian consonants. And clear distinctions must be made between hard Russian consonants and soft Russian consonants. Now, all that remains to do is to practice with some actual texts, especially those that have been phoneticized into either the Russica transliteration system or into IPA. A great many of the former can be found in Musica Russica's choral editions and in the Russian volume of translations and annotations of choral repertoire published by Earth Songs. An extensive selection of Russian art songs and Russian opera arias phoneticized into IPA can be found at RussianArtSong.com. And if you need a Russian or other Slavic text phoneticized, please contact us for a custom quote. Finally, remember that here at Musica Russica we offer diction coaching tracks for every title that we publish, as well as custom tracks that we will record for you upon request for any title or text that we don't publish. These recordings, together with the phonetic transliteration and the principles presented in this video, will enable you to sing in Russian with confidence, accuracy, and authenticity.